When I left Idaho, I told myself it was temporary. Ben said they needed the help. Rachel was due in 4 months, and Emmy had just turned 5. That in-between age when they're too big for naps and too small to reason with. Their house needed work too. The foundation was cracked. The kitchen barely held heat. I offered what I could. Sold my place, wired them enough to cover the contractor's retainer, and kept back just enough for my own security. I don't want to be a burden, I said to Ben on the phone. You won't be, he promised. They had a spare room at the back of the house. It looked out onto a narrow garden, mostly weeds. I planted some rosemary in the first week and found an old watering can behind the shed. I liked the quiet there. A space that didn't ask anything of me. I made myself useful. Up at 6, coffee brewed before anyone stirred. Dishes washed before Rachel came down the stairs. Emmy took to me fast. She always had. I braided her hair for preschool, taught her how to rinse lettuce, told her bedtime stories about wild cats and clever birds. Rachel didn't protest. Not at first. From the outside it looked perfect. Neighbors waved. The mailman smiled. I ran into a woman from their church who clasped my hand and said, "They're so lucky to have you." Smiled back. Didn't correct her. But there were signs. Small ones. Rachel never said thank you. Not once. She didn't look me in the eye when I handed her a cup of tea. She flinched when Emmy reached for my hand in public. She left long lists on the counter. Groceries, laundry, reminders. At dinner, she'd tell Ben about the baby's weight, the doctor's tone, the paint samples for the nursery. She never asked how I was sleeping. One evening I came back from a walk. Emmy had fallen asleep early, and the streetlights were just flickering on. I paused at the kitchen window. The curtains were open, the light inside soft. Rachel stood at the sink, drying a glass. Ben leaned against the fridge. I heard his voice first. "She's doing a lot. I think she's trying." Rachel didn't look up. "If it weren't for her money," she said, "we'd have sent her away by now." They didn't see me standing there. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just watched the light flicker against the glass in Rachel's hand, the faint clink as she set it on the rack. Then I turned, walked around the side of the house, and came in through the back. No one noticed the time I came in. No one asked. I made a cup of tea. The cup trembled faintly in my hand, but I held it still. I said nothing. But something cracked, quiet, clean, and deep. After that night, I began to notice more. The tone Rachel used when she gave instructions. Clipped, practiced. The way Ben avoided eye contact during meals. The shift in air when I entered a room. Little things at first. "We've switched diets," Rachel said one morning, lifting the lid on the soup I'd just made. "No more dairy. And no garlic. Please don't touch the pots." He nodded. Set the ladle down. Later that week I made Emmy pancakes, the kind she liked with blueberries shaped like smiley faces. Rachel saw the plate and raised her eyebrow. "Just walk her to school," she said. "Don't interfere in the kitchen." Ben didn't say anything. He never did. The laundry followed. I'd been ironing Ben's shirts for weeks. White, stiff, the kind he wore to the office. One morning, he held one up with a crease slightly off. "Mom, you ironed this one wrong," he said, not unkindly. Again. That word sat between us like something rotting. I stopped ironing. I stopped cooking after 9. I stopped using the living room after 8. Rachel began using phrases like, "when she's no longer here," as if I were an appliance she had to tolerate until the new one arrived. They never asked me to leave. They simply began designing a space where I didn't belong. Even Emmy changed. Not by choice. Not by cruelty. Just by echo. One afternoon we were in the backyard. She clutched her stuffed cat, worn at the seams, missing an ear, and sat beside me on the grass. The wind was soft that day, brushing over the rosemary I'd planted months before. She leaned close, her voice small. "Grandma," she whispered, "Mommy says you're going away today." I smiled at her. Braided a loose piece of her hair behind her ear. "Did she say where?" Emmy shook her head. Hugged the cat tighter. Children don't invent betrayal. They just repeat it. That night I set the table. For plates. Rachel was upstairs. Ben came down and stood beside me. She says I'm going away, I said softly. He didn't respond. Just reached for a napkin and walked into the dining room. I watched him go, the collar of his shirt slightly wrinkled. He hadn't asked me to iron it. After dinner I washed the dishes slowly. Each plate a kind of silence. Each glass a small goodbye. By the time Emmy was in bed, Rachel came into the kitchen and looked around. Don't feel like you have to do everything, she said. It's not sustainable. I looked at the dish towel in my hand. I don't, I said. She left the room. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and counted the soft clicks of the radiator. At 2:17 a.m., I opened my suitcase and began to fold my clothes. Not all of them. Just what I knew I'd need. I closed the zipper quietly, laid the suitcase by the door, and sat back down. Not ready to leave. Not yet. Just ready to stop pretending that it happened on a Tuesday night. The house was quiet. Emmy already asleep, Rachel in the bath, the baby kicking softly beneath her skin. I sat in the den, knitting a scarf I'd been working on for weeks. Something in soft gray. No pattern. Just rows of even stitches. I found comfort in repetition. Ben came in, hands in his pockets. He looked at the floor, then at the blank television, then finally at me. "Can we talk?" he said. I nodded and set the needles down on the armrest. He sat across from me, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "We've made a decision," he said. I waited. His voice was calm, practiced. The way people speak when they've gone over something too many times. "We found you a place," he said. "It's a senior residence. Private. Really nice. You'd have your own unit, your own kitchen, even a little garden space." I said nothing. He glanced toward the hallway, as if checking to see if Rachel was coming. "We're just trying to make things easier. You've done so much. But with the new baby and everything, it's getting a little too much. We thought this would be better. For everyone. For everyone." Rachel walked in then, her robe tied tight, her hair still damp. She smiled thinly. "It's not personal," she said. "You'll be taken care of. No stress. No pressure." I turned back to Ben. "When?" "Tomorrow morning," he said. "A car will come at 9. So that was it. No discussion. No suggestion. Just an itinerary. I looked down at my hands. They were steady now. The same hands that had cooked their meals, folded their laundry, soothed Emmy's fevers. The hands that had planted rosemary, ironed shirts, wired money without asking for anything back. I looked up at them, my son and the woman he'd chosen, and asked very calmly, "When do I leave?" Ben blinked. "Tomorrow. At 9. He nodded. "All right," I said. Rachel looked momentarily relieved. They expected sadness. Maybe pleading. But I stood up, picked up the scarf from the armrest, and walked past them toward the guest room. I shut the door behind me slowly. Listened as their voices picked back up in the hallway. Muffled, satisfied. Then I opened the closet and took down the suitcase I had packed 2 nights before. I zipped it. Unplugged the charger from the wall. Folded a sweater. Slipped on my walking shoes. At 4:12 a.m. I walked out the back door. The street was still and dark. A few porch lights flickered, but the air was quiet. No one saw me. I left the key on the kitchen table. Next to it I left a note. "You didn't have to ask me to go. You already let me know I wasn't staying." By the time the car arrived at 9, I was gone. Gone without a word. Gone without their help. Gone by my own hand. I arrived in Seattle proper just after sunrise, my suitcase bumping behind me as I stepped off the bus. No one knew I was there. That was the point. I checked into a modest hotel near the train station. Nothing fancy but clean, anonymous. I signed the register with my full name, slowly, like it mattered again. The young man at the counter gave me a room key and a polite smile. He didn't ask why I had no return date. The room had a small desk, a lamp that flickered when touched, and a window that looked out onto an alley. I unpacked only what I needed: a pair of slacks, a knit blouse, my folder of documents. The folder had been packed for months. Long before Rachel's remark at the window. Long before the folded napkins and the little humiliations. Because Harold always said, "Keep one thing that's only yours." In our marriage, that had meant a savings account. Small but untouched. In widowhood it had meant investments. And in the quiet corners of my new life, it meant that while I helped pay to renovate their home, I never gave everything. I had kept back a portion, small but enough, and tucked it into a separate account, untouched, unlinked. Ben didn't know it existed. Rachel certainly didn't. Now was time to use it. I called the number from a card I'd kept in my wallet for over a decade. "Clara," I said when she picked up. "It's Linda Harper." There was a pause, then warmth. "Linda. My God. It's been years." "I need your help," I said. By noon, we were sitting across from each other at a small office in the legal district. Clara Jennings hadn't changed much. She still wore neat suits, still kept her hair pinned back like a schoolteacher. Her hands were firm when she shook mine. I laid the folder out on her desk. "These are the renovation payments," I said. "Bank transfers, emails, text confirmations." She flipped through them quickly, nodding. "All in your name?" "Yes. Some were joint, but most were from me directly. I also have this." I handed her a photocopy. "The mortgage from when Ben and Rachel first bought the house. I co-signed the loan." Pause. "You're still on the title." "I don't know," I said. "That's why I'm here." She opened her laptop, tapped a few keys. A minute passed. "Well," she said, her eyes narrowing. "That's interesting." "What is?" "They attempted a title transfer 6 months ago." I sat back in the chair. She turned the screen so I could see. A scan of a signature. My name, except not quite. The tail on the D curved up instead of down. The A was open. It was close. But it wasn't mine. "They forged it," Clara said quietly. "They tried to remove you from ownership without your consent." I stared at the screen. Not with shock, but with a kind of distant clarity, like watching a storm form on the horizon. "They didn't think you'd check," she added. "No," I said. "They didn't." She printed the file, stapled it to the others, and leaned back. "You have grounds," she said. "Not just to challenge the ownership, but to file criminal charges. At the very least, you can contest the title, freeze the equity, and reclaim your share." I nodded slowly. "I want to do it. But quietly. I don't want drama. Just the truth. Protected." Clara smiled. "Linda, if there's one thing I know how to do, it's quiet truth." By that evening we had a plan. She would begin the title contest immediately. A legal freeze on any sale, refinance, or equity withdrawal. All perfectly legitimate. All supported by the documents I'd provided. We drafted a motion to be filed under seal. The next step was mine. I opened my account, the one they didn't know about, and transferred every remaining dollar into a protected trust. It was for Emmy. Not her parents. Just her. It would be released to her at 25. No early access. No parental control. Clara would serve as a legal executor. "She's the only one who never lied to me," I said. Clara nodded. That night I returned to the hotel. I stood at the window and looked out over the alley. Trash bins. A flickering bulb. A cat weaving between the shadows. I didn't feel angry. Not anymore. Just ready. 2 days after the trust was finalized, I moved into a small apartment across the courtyard from Ben and Rachel's house. Not next door. Just far enough that I wouldn't hear raised voices or smell dinners I no longer shared. But close enough to see the maple tree where Emmy liked to hide her treasures. Close enough to wave if she looked out the window. I chose the top-floor unit. 1 bedroom, worn wooden floors, and a narrow balcony that caught morning sun. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every light switch, every drawer, every chip tile mine. I furnished it modestly. A table and 2 chairs. Twin bed. Kettle. I bought a stack of library books and a second-hand rug the color of dry moss. I unpacked the scarf I'd been knitting and draped it over the back of the couch. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I let them wonder. 3 days later, Clara filed the contestation motion. It was direct. No aggression. Just a request for injunction, backed by original mortgage paperwork, bank statements, forged title documents, and a timeline of events. Legally, the house was in limbo now. No sale. No loan. No access to full equity without my signature. Clara mailed a copy of the motion to their home. Certified. The next morning Ben called. He didn't leave a message. That evening Rachel called twice. The second time she left a voicemail. Linda, what is this? What are you doing? We don't understand. Please call back. Her voice was strained. Not scared. Not yet. Just thrown off balance. I didn't return the call. Instead, I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the light fade across their backyard. 2 days later, the emails began. Rachel first, then Ben. They pleaded confusion. Frustration. They framed my actions as betrayal. They used words like family and forgiveness. But there was no apology. Only surprise that I had moved without asking. Acted without permission. Then came the Facebook post. Rachel, arms wrapped around Emmy. The caption soft and wounded. When the people who raised you become strangers, and you're left to protect your own. Please keep us in your prayers as we go through a painful family situation. We're heartbroken. The comments poured in. She gave you so much. How could she do this? Family comes first. Always. Sending love. Hope this gets resolved soon. Neighbors messaged me. One from the church group. Even a second cousin I hadn't spoken to since Harold's funeral. Each one carried the same tone. You've gone too far. But I didn't respond. Because silence is sometimes the only language that's still honest. That Sunday I walked to the market early. Bought plums and rye bread. Passed by a newsstand and saw a headline about forged wills. A reminder that these things happen in quiet homes, between people who swear they mean no harm. That evening I cooked soup. Listened to a jazz station on low. Read half a novel and folded laundry in silence. Then, around 9 p.m., a knock at the door. I knew it was coming. I opened it to find Ben. Alone. No coat. No umbrella, even though it was misting. He looked thinner. Paler. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded once and stepped aside. He stood in the middle of the small room, looking around like it didn't compute. You really moved, he said. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? I walked to the kettle. Would it have mattered? He didn't answer. I poured 2 cups of tea. Set his on the table. He didn't sit. Rachel's panicking, he said. She didn't expect this. I sipped my tea. Neither did I. He ran a hand through his hair. Said finally, why didn't you just say something? We could have talked. You made a decision, I said. I just followed it. His mouth tightened. You know we never meant to hurt you. I said nothing. Mom, the trust. The legal stuff. It's extreme. It's protection, I replied. It's mine. He looked at me for a long time. Then down at the cup he hadn't touched. We're not bad people, he said quietly. I let the silence stretch. Maybe not, I said. But you forgot I was a person. He stood then. Didn't finish the tea. Didn't hug me goodbye. Just said, I hope you'll reconsider. I didn't answer. After he left, I locked the door. Sat back down. Picked up my knitting. The scarf was longer now. So was the space between who I'd been and who I was becoming. The silence didn't last. Ben's visit had only been the beginning. 2 days later, Rachel called again. Not from her cell this time, but from the landline, the number still etched into my mind from the years when we shared grocery lists and holiday plans. She didn't start with hello. I just want to understand, she said. Her voice was low, deliberate. How you could do this to your own family. I didn't reply. You're tearing everything apart, she continued. The house is frozen, Ben's job is unstable, and Emmy's asking why you're not coming to dinner anymore. Still I said nothing. Silence, I've learned, rattles people more than anger. You were like a second mother to me, she said, sharper now. And now you're acting like a stranger. Finally spoke. I didn't act. I responded. She hung up. That afternoon, I received an email from Ben's cousin Laura, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who apparently felt entitled to weigh in. Rachel's devastated. No one expected this from you. You've always been the rock. Please, Linda, don't let bitterness ruin what you've built with them. The phrase, what you've built, clung to me all evening. 'Cause I had built it. The kitchen walls. The nursery closet. Equity. Brick by brick, I'd helped make that house into a home. And when they no longer needed me, they tried to erase my fingerprints. But now they couldn't. The contest was moving forward. Clara had filed an additional injunction to pause all financial activity tied to the house until the title dispute was resolved. The bank, once indifferent, now flagged the account. Even their property tax assessor was notified. Ben called again, this time from work. I just want to talk, he said. Off the record. Without lawyers. Then you should have spoken before you signed my name, I said. There was a pause. Rachel's not well, he said finally. The pregnancy's been hard. Kept my tone level. That's unfortunate. You know Emmy misses you. I miss her too. He tried again. She doesn't understand any of this. She will, I said. Someday. The next week brought more pressure. Less direct, more public. A letter from their pastor. A note slipped under my door from a neighbor in the courtyard. A voicemail from Rachel's mother, who hadn't spoken to me since the wedding, now suddenly invested in healing old wounds. But I knew what all this was. It wasn't reconciliation. It was strategy. They wanted control again. Narrative control. Financial control. Emotional control. But I was no longer part of their script. I'd taken the pen back. That Sunday, I saw them in the courtyard for the first time. Ben was carrying Emmy. Rachel walked behind, one hand on her lower back. Her face was drawn, tired. Emmy spotted me and waved. Small, excited. I waved back. Rachel's eyes met mine just for a second. Then she turned her daughter's face away and kept walking. I didn't flinch. Because I had already decided. I wouldn't beg to be loved. I wouldn't argue my worth. I would simply remain. 3 days later, Clara called. They've filed a response, she said. They're denying the forgery, claiming it was a misunderstanding. That you might have signed and forgotten. I laughed softly. They're going to fight it, then? Clara sighed. They'll try. But we have the handwriting analysis ready, the time-stamped documents, the notary discrepancies. It's solid. What happens now? Now, she said, we let them talk themselves into a corner. That night, I opened the envelope I'd sealed months earlier, the one with the original mortgage document and my notes in the margin. I added one more slip of paper inside. A memory is not a blank check. The next week I saw Emmy again. By court order, I'd petitioned for regular visitation. It was a small miracle the judge granted it so quickly, but Clara said the filings, the trust, the legal motion, the documented care, made my case undeniable. The first visit was stiff. Rachel dropped her off and didn't look at me. Emmy stood in the doorway of my apartment, clutching her stuffed cat, unsure. Hi, I said softly. Want to see my balcony? She nodded. We sat out there for an hour, watching pigeons on the wires. She asked where my old room was. I told her I had a new one now. Did Mommy get mad at you? She asked. I shook my head. No. Grown-ups just make choices sometimes. Will you leave again? No, I said. Not unless I choose to. She leaned against me then, her head warm on my arm. I kissed the top of her hair. We said nothing for a long time. And in that silence I felt it. Not triumph, not revenge. Just something steady. A reclaiming. Had lost a home. But I had found ground. 3 months later, the house was quiet again. But not in the way it used to be. The judge ruled in my favor. The title contest closed with a firm judgment. My 40% ownership stake was upheld, the attempted forgery acknowledged but not pursued as criminal. A compromise Clara and I accepted to keep things from spiraling further. Ben and Rachel were required to submit any future financial actions involving the property to joint oversight. Any attempt to sell, refinance, or transfer equity would require my signature, or the court's direct intervention. The judgment stood. I wasn't erased. And I no longer needed to prove that I existed in their home. 'Cause now I had my own. The trust for Emmy was finalized. A clean, protected document with provisions that couldn't be bent by parental manipulation. She wouldn't touch it until she was 25, and not a day sooner. It wasn't revenge. It was insurance. A promise written in paper and law, not sentiment. I didn't tell her parents. They'd find out eventually. Rachel moved out shortly after the ruling. No dramatic announcement. No final scene. Just one day, her car wasn't in the driveway. A week later, neither was her name on the mailbox. I heard whispers that she moved in with her sister. That she and Ben were taking space. I didn't ask. I didn't celebrate. I didn't judge. I'd already stopped seeing them as a unit to orbit around. Ben stayed in the house. He began therapy. Something Clara said might happen when reality stopped being something he could control. I saw him twice after the ruling. Once in the courtyard when he looked away. Once at Emmy's school when he gave a short nod and said, "Thanks for coming." He looked tired. Not defeated. Just emptied. I didn't hate him. That surprised me. But hate takes more energy than I was willing to give. I visited Emmy every Wednesday and every other Saturday. We walked to the bakery with the green awning, where she always chose the pastry with the most powdered sugar. We planted tiny succulents on my balcony, lined in cracked teacups I found at the thrift store. She asked fewer questions now. She accepted my presence as a constant. Not a guest, not a helper, not someone waiting for permission. Just someone who stayed. One Saturday evening, after hot cocoa and a picture book, she looked at me across the small table. "Do you live alone because you're sad?" Thought for a moment. "No," I said. "I live alone because I'm free." She nodded. Then reached for her stuffed cat and began humming to it softly, content. After she left, I lit a candle. Not for memory. Not for mourning. Just for warmth. Some nights I played the old records Harold used to love. Jazz mostly. I sat by the window, the same scarf draped over my lap. Half finished but still growing. Quiet had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was expansive. That December Clara and I met for tea. She slid an envelope across the table. "Settlement finalized," she said. "They won't challenge the judgment." And the court added language to protect against future claims. He nodded. "I'm proud of you," she added. "Not many people would have done it with such grace." Smiled small honest. "I didn't need grace," I said. "I needed clarity." That night I wrote my final letter. "Ben. Not long. Just enough. You were my son before you were anyone's husband. Before you were a father. Before you were a man with a mortgage and plans and pride. I loved you before you knew how to speak. I still love you. But I no longer wait for your approval. Or your invitation. Or your apology. I gave everything you didn't ask for. And you took it without malice but also without pause. This isn't about punishment. It's about peace. And peace only comes when we stop waiting to be seen. I see myself now. And that is enough." I didn't send it. I folded it, sealed it, and placed it in the drawer with the mortgage papers and the picture of Emmy drawing chalk cats on the sidewalk. Maybe one day I'll give it to him. Maybe not. Some truths don't need an audience. The next spring, I planted rosemary in a ceramic pot by the balcony. It bloomed slowly, quietly, in the morning light. And every evening, as Emmy waved from across the courtyard, I waved back. No shame. No guilt. No tether. Just a woman who had learned, finally, fully, that dignity doesn't come from being needed. It comes from never giving yourself away for less than you're worth. And I was worth keeping. Even if I was the only one who saw it.